If you're like me in the way that you are, were, or going to be a teenager, you might have found yourself in self-doubt spirals, questioning what you're doing with your life and whether or not you've strayed from the path that you always dreamed of. These years are filled with questions and not so many answers, as people are inclined to tell you. And in the search for answers, we stray from those which we must find for ourselves. People are flooding us with opinions, which can affect our beliefs and perspectives in both negative and positive ways. Heck, maybe that's the reason why I decided to do my talk, though I like to think my opinion is a little bit more beneficial than most. Let me tell you a story. When I first arrived at my new, very international school, the one I'm currently at, to study the IB, I found myself surrounded by people who thought very differently from myself and the people that I had previously surrounded myself with. I grew up in Harare, Zimbabwe, in an extremely privileged position, which I wouldn't give up. It was some of the best years of my life. However, it meant that I was surrounded by people who thought in a very particular way. One that was a little bit set in the past, a little bit too much like a blueprint. You went to school, then to high school, then into a stable job and career for the rest of your life, which didn't suit me. As someone who wanted to make his voice heard, who wanted to get into things like acting. So it came as somewhat of a relief to escape the echo chamber from back home. However, I wouldn't be telling you the story if there wasn't something about it that somewhat set me off a bit. And it came in the most absurd form. The question of a gap year. See, I remember on my second or third day, I sat down to lunch in the midst of a heated debate concerning the rationality of a gap year, which, in my opinion at the time, was a perfectly reasonable thing to have. I mean, why wouldn't you? However, upon listening closer, I realized that my opinion did not reflect on the majority of the group. In fact, it was quite the opposite. One distinct line I remember hearing was, "Why the hell would you do that?" Directed at another member of the group. Now, you can imagine at this point, I stood up and declared no. In fact, I stayed quite quiet until eventually the question came to me, to which I very quickly subdued myself to, "Nah, mate, I agree. Gap years are dumb, bro." I was fortunate enough to seek the advice of a guidance counselor who assured me that my plan for a gap year would suit me just fine. However, it doesn't change the fact that I changed my opinion to suit those around me. And though this may seem like a minor thing, it can have major ramifications for the future. Imagine you picked your science based on what your friend said was best for your career. Really, you just want a study buddy. Or worse, you picked your career based on what your family said was best for you. But everyone has their own opinions and motives. So what can you do? As a teenager, you're trying to find your place in the world. And often this means rebelling against some of the most important people in your life. I found around the age of 14 or 15, you're most prone to this change. It's a time in your life when you're trying to gain a sense of independence, to free yourself. I found it with my parents, this idea that I had to rebel against any notion or idea that they had that in any way controlled me. Because if I didn't, it was somehow conforming to this hierarchy I so desperately wanted to get away from. At the same time, I began to reflect more and more what my friends did. Fortunately for me, these were really amazing people who allowed me to grow and develop as a person in this unsteady time. However, I realized that this isn't the case for most people. In fact, looking back, I realized that some of my friends who I previously surrounded myself with weren't ones that were really going to help me grow. But what can you do if you're in one of these situations? Because you can't just ignore the people in your life. I think the key is to surround yourself instead with the people that are there to support you, the risks you take, the decisions you make, but are also willing to go against these ideas, to get you to question them in a calm and rational way that gets you to consider them to their fullest extent. So maybe what I'm trying to reiterate is a balance between dreams and reality, a balance between subjective and objective thinking when it comes to the big decisions, as well as the little ones. And finally, a balance between people and the impact that they have on your life and the decisions you make. However, this is a line that is incredibly hard to find. However, I think when you find it, you'll find yourself in a position of freedom and independence, where you're able to cut and change the path of life to make it your own. Because people's opinions matter, but not enough to change you. Thank you.